Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being with us today for this press conference to present the preliminary statement of findings and conclusions from the international observers for yesterday's presidential election in Georgia. Presenting the statement today will be Christian Vigenin, the Special Coordinator and leader of the OSCE Short-Term Election Observer Mission, followed by Andrei Hunko, the head of the delegation from the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, Margareta Satterfeld, the head of the delegation from the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, Rasa Yuknevichenia, the head of the delegation from the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, and Laima Andrikine, the head of the delegation from the European Parliament. Now, there will be an opportunity for journalists to ask questions after the presentation of the preliminary findings. So with no further ado, I'll hand the floor to Mr. Vigenin. And excuse me, and this is an oversight, I'm in trouble when I get back to the office because my boss, Ambassador Gert Henrik Arens, will also be presenting the statement today. Forgive me.
Very good. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, representatives of the media, I'm honored to share with you the preliminary findings and conclusions of the International Election Observation Mission, which is a result of a common endeavor of the OSCE Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, whose long-term observation is reinforced by 4 separate Euro-Atlantic parliamentary institutions. The election was competitive and professionally administered. Candidates were able to campaign freely and voters had a genuine choice, although there were instances of misuse of administrative resources and senior state officials from the ruling party were involved in the campaign. Substantial imbalance in donations and excessively high spending limits further contributed to an unlevel playing field. While public broadcasters provided all candidates a platform to present their views, the sharp polarization of the private media, negative campaigning and harsh rhetoric, and lack of analytical reporting limited voters' ability to make a fully informed choice. Legal changes that increased the representation of the ruling party at all election administration levels and the insufficient transparency in the selection of non-partisan members undermined the perception of impartiality. Nevertheless, election day generally proceeded in a professional, orderly, and transparent manner, despite some procedural issues during counting, as well as many citizens, observers, and media acting on behalf of political parties and party supporters, potentially influencing voters outside polling stations. There are many elements that go into an elections, so I would like to briefly highlight a number of aspects that came into play. Please note that these are based on the work of a long-term observation mission who has been here for more than a month, as well as almost 400 observers from 40 countries deployed around the country yesterday. I use the opportunity to thank all of them and to underline that their involvement is an expression of solidarity with the people of Georgia. The legal framework provides an adequate basis for the conduct of democratic elections. Recent amendments to the election code introduced a number of technical amendments and improvements. However, these amendments did not fully address gaps and inconsistencies. The Central Election Commission made substantial and visibly successful efforts to increase the competence of lower-level commissions. Yesterday, while visiting polling stations, I saw many women and many young people serving as polling station officials. Their enthusiasm and professionalism to actively engage in service of their country should be acknowledged. At the same time, there were certain aspects, including absence of adequate regulation of appointment of non-partisan members of election commissions, that casted shadow on the performance of election administration. The law provides for private funding for all candidates and public funding for those nominated by parties. However, the lack of clear regulation for obtaining and using loans for campaign expenses potentially contributes to an unlevel playing field. There are still a number of long-standing recommendations to be addressed. In general, in this election, Georgia has shown the maturity of its democracy. This further raises expectations. Therefore, while praising the achievements, it is important to be aware of the shortcomings related to campaign environment, finances, and legal framework in general. I hope that the Georgian people will actively participate in the second round of the election, and the outcome will fully reflect their will. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vigenin. And now please, Mr. Hunko.
Okay, thank you. Dear ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to thank all the Georgian citizens we met at the polling stations yesterday for their warm welcome and friendly cooperation throughout the day. I share the conclusions of the International Election Observations Mission presented by my colleague, and I take the opportunity to thank all my colleagues for their good cooperation. Georgia is a member of the Council of Europe and is under the monitoring procedure in the Parliamentary Assembly. The Assembly has observed all elections in Georgia since 1995. Our delegation was composed of 31 observers representing all our political groups at the Assembly from 15 Council of Europe member states, including our legal experts from the Venice Commission. Yesterday, on polling day, we had 16 teams of observers deployed in different regions of Georgia, in Tbilisi and surrounding areas. Our observers noted that voting was smooth and well organized. Electors made their choice without restrictions. As for the election campaign, our observers noted that the system of campaign expenditure was surprisingly generous, with money coming from the state budget and private donations, and this in a country with a high level of poverty. We also noted the presence of a considerable number of so-called technical candidates campaigning in favor of other candidates, using media time and public funding, which meant that there was not a level playing field and which did not improve public confidence in the democratic electoral process. The PACE delegation will return to Georgia to observe the second round. The Parliamentary Assembly and the Venice Commission hope to continue their close cooperation with Georgia, and our full report on the observation of the general elections will be presented during our January part session in 2019. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Hunko. And now please, Ms. Satterfeld.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Dear ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to thanks the Georgian people and express my great gratitude for receiving us. As always, Georgian hospitality is great and also very welcoming. I myself, I have served as head of the OSCE PA delegation, and the delegation have included more than 50 members of parliament from more than 20 countries. And we have observed the election spread all over Georgia. As parliamentarians, we recognize the importance of democratic elections as we are elected by ourselves. And our duty is, as always, to represent the people who elected us, as well as taking care of the democratic aspect of the election when we observe. And I also would like to say that if there will be a second round, we will of course take part and be there as a delegation from OSCE PA. And we do also share the statement that is done. First of all, I would like to say that at the outset that I have been here in Georgia for 3 elections, and the first election I observed, it was 2008. And I have seen that there have been a lot of efforts made to improve the electoral process. And I would like to commend the Georgian people for showing once more their commitment to democracy. First of all, I would like to say that the candidate registrations process was transparent and inclusive, included 25 candidates that were registered. And the fundamental freedom was generally respected, and contestants were able to campaign freely. Election day's procedure were conducted in a smooth and professional manner and were assessed positively by observers, by the members of the Precinct Election Committee. With respect to the media, the environment, however, remains sharply political, polarized, and did not contribute to provide voters with the qualitative information they deserve in a mature society. The superficiality and aggressivity exhibited by some stakeholders during the campaign coverage, in this case, had a negative effect on the dialogue between civil society and the authorities. This is particularly regrettable since Georgia's vibrant civil society once more largely contributed to the transparency of the electoral process. As the campaign included harsh accusation and negative campaigning, I encourage all election stakeholders, inclusive the media and the civil society, to exercise the highest level of professional ethics, particularly during the campaign for the second round. And once again, allow me to express my deep and sincere gratitude to the authorities and people of Georgia for their warm welcome and cooperation during our presence here. The OSCPA looks forward to being back in Georgia for the second round of this important presidential election. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ms. Sutterfield. And now please, Ms. Yuknevich,
Thank you so much. My colleagues and I from NATO Parliamentary Assembly, we are glad to participate in this observation mission. Our team included 14 members of parliament from 7 countries, as well as 3 members of staff. We were deployed in 5 different regions. I should mention that the NATO Parliamentary Assembly is separate from NATO, so I only speak on behalf of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, not NATO. It is the 5th time that the NATO Parliamentary Assembly observes election in Georgia at the invitation of the Georgian authorities. By making NATO membership its strategic objective, Georgia committed to respect the democratic values which underpin our alliance. And Georgia has been and remains a leader in Euro-Atlantic integration, a positive example of peaceful democratic transformation. As friends of Georgia, we have supported and encouraged this process. And we have been open and frank when there have been issues. Today again, I want to be open and frank. Over the years, we have raised concerns about the dangers of excessive polarization and the absence of a culture of compromise and dialogue. We have also highlighted that without strong safeguards, the concentration of power and resources can be a risk for democracy. Unfortunately, these elections have shown that these issues have not been properly addressed. Our report mentions several serious examples, including misuse of administrative resources, campaigning by state officials, and unbalanced funding. The use of fake observers and so-called technical candidates is also a distortion of democracy. In addition, we have seen new negative developments we have not seen before, particularly unacceptable verbal attacks against NGOs. All these issues taken together present a stark contrast to the 2013 presidential elections. Despite all this, we saw yesterday many citizens determined to exercise their right to choose their head of state. I regret, of course, that Georgian citizens in the occupied territories of Abkhazia and South Ossetia could not participate in this election. We saw also many members of election commissions determined to run the voting efficiently, and many observers committed to contribute to a transparent democratic process. I want to take this opportunity to salute them all. Georgia will for the first time hold a second round for presidential elections. I hope that those issues which can be addressed will be addressed. I also urge Georgian authorities to urgently deal with the broader problems mentioned in our report. We will, of course, continue to support and encourage them in this effort. We will also continue to support a constructive dialogue between majority and opposition, without which no reform will be sustainable. If it so chooses, Georgia has all it takes to remain a positive example of reforms and a leader in European and Euro-Atlantic integration. Good luck to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Yuknevichenia. And now, please, Ms. Andrikina.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we are very pleased to be here at the invitation of Georgian authorities to observe these elections, and I would like to thank you for your interest in our joint work today. This may be the last direct presidential elections for a mandate with reduced prerogatives, but it is a crucial milestone on the path towards the democratic consolidation of the Georgian state. Georgia remains a priority country for the European Union and the European Parliament. We are successfully implementing the EU-Georgia Association Agreement and the visa liberalization policy, and are actively supporting the strengthening of democracy. This is why we are here today. The European Parliament delegation is made of 7 members representing 5 political groups. Together, we fully subscribe to the statement of preliminary findings and conclusions, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank the OSCE Special Coordinator, Mr. Christian Vigenin, for our close cooperation. I also thank Ambassador Arens and his team for their hard work. As regards Election Day, let me emphasize that we are very happy to see that this time cases of violence have not been reported. This allowed citizens to safely exercise their democratic right. Of course, we deeply regret Russia's occupation of South Ossetia and Abkhazia, as well as the decision of the de facto ruling authorities to close the administrative borderline with South Ossetia. This deprived many Georgian citizens from casting their ballots. As we highlighted in previous elections, we commend the high engagement of women in running the electoral process, notably in the polling stations. We should point out, however, that the pre-electoral debate has too often been focused on negative campaigning and personal attacks, including very harsh accusations, rather than on concrete visions for the future. The polarization of the media landscape did not help to provide a non-partisan platform for debate between the candidates. Still, we welcome the high level of engagement by the independent civil society organizations, especially those observing the electoral process. We note with great concern that some of them have been targeted by intense verbal attacks, despite or maybe because of the quality of their work. Georgia, a country which aspires to join the European Union, cannot have its highest office holders calling citizen observers organizations accomplices of fascism. Words have meaning, and the Georgian citizens deserve more than such language. A thriving democracy needs a vibrant and independent civil society, which must be heard, trusted, protected, and supported in its important work. This is what the European Union is committed to, and this is what we will keep doing in the years ahead. Ladies and gentlemen, the electoral framework has been reformed, but still more can be done. Let me stress in particular the issue of campaign financing. In 2016, we already highlighted the strong imbalances in resources, the influence of business in politics, and the need for an even level playing field and fair competition between candidates. This is still true today. For example, we remain skeptical about the very high annual cap on citizen donations of up to 60,000 Georgian lari, which is, to put this into context, equivalent to 4.5 years of an average salary in the country. Loopholes such as this one should be closed for future elections. All these remarks we also conveyed to the President of Georgia, Mr. Georgi Margvelashvili, and to the Prime Minister, Mr. Mamuka Bakhtadze. We were glad to hear that they fully agreed with us, especially on the treatment of civil society organizations. Ladies and gentlemen, as you know, the European Parliament will remain focused on the developments in Georgia, one of the countries associated with the European Union. In 2 weeks, at our next plenary session in Strasbourg, we will hold a debate, which I am sure will be the occasion to reaffirm our conclusions on these elections and emphasize once more our support to Georgia and its citizens. So today we are waiting for the final results of yesterday's voting, and if there will be a second round, European Parliament delegation will come and observe it. Thank you.
And thank you, Ms. Andrikine. And now please, Ambassador Arends.
Dear ladies and gentlemen from the media, good afternoon. My name is Gerd Arends, and I'm the head of the ODIHR Election Observation Mission. Since an election is not a one-day event, we have come to Georgia already on 18th of September of this year with a core team of 14 members and 28 long-term observers all over the country. Yesterday, we were joined by 240 ODIHR short-term observers. During these 6 weeks, we have met with all important stakeholders and collected a host of observations. We are grateful for the very friendly reception given to us. This refers to the election administration, to the government, to the candidates and their staff, to the media, and to the very lively civil society in this country. They gave us a feeling that we were welcome. Shortly before Election Day, we joined forces with the 4 parliamentary delegations present at this table, forming the International Election Observation Mission, IEOM. The preliminary statement presented here today reflects the joint election experience of the IEOM's members and documents a considerable international interest in these elections. I would like to thank the heads of our partner delegations for the excellent cooperation which we had here in the last days. Georgia has a good international standing as a democracy. However, the visible commitment shown by voters should not be undermined by campaigning members of the political class. Unfortunately, we witnessed sharp confrontation, gross exaggerations, negative campaigning, and personal insults. Candidates also made promises on issues that do not fall into the purview of the future president under the new constitutional order as it has evolved over the past few years. The campaign also failed largely to deal with issues that are really important for Georgia, such as the rule of law and economic inequality, to mention just two. Once there is a second round called for, the ODIHR Election Observation Mission will remain in Georgia to follow it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ambassador Ahrens. As mentioned earlier, we now have time for questions from the media. You've jumped ahead. You already know how this works. So I'll ask you please to raise your hands. We'll have a microphone brought to you. And before asking your question, if you could please just give your name as well as the media outlet you represent. Sorry, I think we have.
Thank you. I'm Margaret Antitsa from Reuters News Agency, Caucasus Bureau. My first question is to Mr. Christian Vigenin. Irregularities and violations you were talking about during the election day, the process of counting votes as well as pre-election campaign. Could all those irregularities affect the results in the first round? Because it seems that there will be second round. And my second question is, if all those issues you all, ladies and gentlemen, you talking about at the press conference are not addressed before, at least before the second round of the election, well, may it impede the process of Georgia's moving towards NATO and aspirations to NATO and the European Union? Thank you very much. And you're all welcome to answer this question because you are all important. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. In my opinion, the irregularities that we have observed during the election day are not of a scale which would put into danger the results that have been at least partially announced, and we of course wait for the final results to be announced by the Central Electoral Committee. As for the period before the elections, inevitably to a certain extent all the shortcomings which affect the legal framework, but also the way candidates behaved in this campaign, private media and so on, everything that we have mentioned and that you will find in the conclusions that will be available to you any moment. I think not yet, but maybe, as I understand, you will have all of them very soon. They inevitably, to a certain extent, is a campaign, have affected the campaign. But as I said, election day was conducted in a way which does not put into question the results. As for the second question, obviously some of the issues that we have highlighted cannot be addressed between the two rounds of the elections. But we hope that at least those that can be changed will be changed. I talk about, first of all, the way campaign will be conducted in this period, debate between the two remaining candidates before the second round. We hope for more, how can I say, less polarized attitude of private media and some other elements that can be improved in this period. And of course, we hope that what I find important, and I finish by saying this, there will be again strong participation on the side of the Georgian voters. The more people participate in these elections, the less questions there will be about the final result. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. About the election and membership of the European Union, I would like to mention that there is the Eastern Partnership between European Union and Georgia. And this is going on, and it's not going to end. And it was Sweden and Poland who was the initiator for the Eastern Partnership. That's very important, not only for Georgia, also for the European Union. Thank you.
Okay. Just a short answer. I am full of hope that issues will be addressed before second round of the election, and Georgia will remain a positive example of reform and one of the leaders of Euro-Atlantic integration. This is what I am full of hope.
When it comes to the improvement of the electoral system, there are actually two different periods. One is until the election is really over. We are observers and we are under strict instruction not to interfere, not to give advice. But during this period, of course, when you read our preliminary statement, there is enough that could be done on, by those responsible without us particularly asking them to do that. But the second period is once the election is totally over, ODIHR will publish a final report, and that contains recommendations. And according to OCE rules, all participating states are obliged to consider these recommendations, not necessarily to accept them, but they have to look at them and deal with them. So this is two different things.
Thank you. If we can, sorry, no. Just...
Sopiko Megrelidze, Associated Press. You have touched briefly upon the issue of ruling party criticism and intimidation of NGOs, but if you can tell us, in light of Georgia's Euro-Atlantic aspiration, how harmful this tendency can be, criticism of NGOs by the ruling party. Thank you.
Well, I guess that a few lines, a few words on my side. I think that we have to be careful in making big conclusions, because it's still to be seen, is it really a tendency or it was a temporary issue related to the way the overall campaign has taken place. Because we have seen, on one hand, these attacks, verbal attacks on civil society organizations, not all of them, not on the society, but on certain organizations. At the same time, we've seen also certain political engagement of some of the NGOs, which they are not supposed, in principle, to do. So I would say that we have to be careful. I personally, since I did not answer the first question, not intentionally, I don't see at this stage the EU and NATO aspirations of Georgia endangered by the way these elections, or at least the first round, took place. We, of course, focus on the shortcomings more than to the positive sides. You've seen a number of shortcomings, but at the same time, Georgia remains a vibrant democracy, and I said that these elections, despite these shortcomings, show the maturity of their democracy. As I said, it's still to be seen. Are these elements a tendency, or this is a temporary issue that will be further dealt after the elections are over? Thank you.
Thank you. In addition to what I already said about the importance of civil society organizations in any society, and in Georgian society in particular, I would like to add that for the European Parliament, it's a key issue. And of course, we will monitor the situation and we will, address the situation in all possible formats we might have. Then when you will receive our preliminary findings and conclusions, you will see that this issue is addressed in our joint document. And for instance, I quote, during the pre-election period, citizen observer groups faced intense verbal attacks on their work and representatives by high-ranking members of the ruling party and senior public officials. And you will find at least 2 more paragraphs on this. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Régis Janté from Le Figaro and Radio France International. Some spoke about the use of the misuse of the administrative resources. Could you a bit tell us what was the scale of it, if you had some means to assess it? Thank you very much.
The use of administrative resources has been a problem here for quite some time. And that is why the Central Election Commission, for example, have established a protocol and how to deal with these matters. It is very often difficult to say whether it is a use of administrative resources or not. For example, if a high-ranking member of government uses a security car or other security possibilities, then I think this is understandable because they have a right to do so. Here, the problem was that public officials, to a large extent, participated in the campaign of one of the candidates. In the papers here, you find a lot of details on this, which I would rather not repeat here now. But this is a real problem and has to be dealt with.
Do we have further questions this afternoon? Well, all right then. I'm happy that we've managed to explain everything. On your way out, I'll just mention the preliminary statement that's been presented here today will be available on the way out in both English and Georgian, as will be a press release that summarizes what you've heard here today. Both of these documents will also be available on the OSCE, ODIHR, and OSCE Parliamentary Assembly websites, as well as those of our partner delegations. Otherwise, nothing left to do but wish you a wonderful afternoon.